Giselle, and that was it. I didn't understand anything else.
And Q&A.
You talked about the notes, right? That you should ask if you have any questions. Also, a gentleman asked if you could take pictures of the slides. Please do. Please do, because we don't have a handout, and it might help you remember important points of our presentation. We're very happy to see you here today. We're going to be presenting 3 lectures this week. This is the first one. Very important, the power of imperfection. Don't be afraid to fail. All artists and inventors need to know this. The one tomorrow is presented by Giselle, an expert from Design for America, and that will be about what we don't know about design thinking. We all think we know a lot. There's always more to learn. And so you can go over what you do know and then learn new aspects of it. Friday, I will be giving a lecture on how to sell your products in English to American and international companies. It's very difficult in the beginning. I've been selling my products and ideas for 30 years, and I have a lot of experience, good and bad. So I can share my knowledge with you, and you can learn how to sell your product in one sentence. One sentence. Because after one sentence, if you don't get the attention, bye-bye. And you don't want them to say bye-bye. You say, oh, hello, more and more. So we are here today. I am here as a Fulbright specialist. This is my 3rd Fulbright. I am a playwright, an international playwright, theater producer, author, and lecturer. This is my first lecture in Asia. So I'm very excited. And after many years of failures and rewriting and listening to many different people, especially because the story was in another country, I had to change it a lot and fail and try again. But I finally got my book published in both languages, and I've had 6 productions of my play in both Spanish and English. And this is my face the day after my opening night in Europe. I was very happy. And I want to see this look on your faces too, when you sell your first product or the 10th product. Okay. And this is my colleague, Giselle Molina from Northwestern University.
Hi. So I'm also really excited to be here today. I also talk really fast when I get excited, so tell me to slow down or to repeat anything if I get a little bit too quick maybe. So I'm a graduate from Cornell University, where I studied psychology. I'm actually currently applying to medical school because I'm very interested in medicine, but I'm actually also a designer. I've been working in an organization called Design for America for the last 5 years. Design for America is an organization that teaches undergraduate and graduate students in universities around the country in the United States how to use design thinking, specifically a type of design called human-centered design, which focuses on empathy and people's needs. And these students apply this process in their local communities on social projects that they're interested in. For example, homelessness, literacy, water conservation, and try and come up with real-world solutions to real-world problems. And so my job in that organization was first as a student, working in different design teams on all sorts of projects, where I failed many times and also succeeded a few, I hope. And then later as a teacher and as a mentor, where I mentored students and helped them learn the process and how to do it better. And I'll talk a lot more about Design for America and the process later in this lecture. But first, we just thought that if we're going to talk about failure and mistakes today, we'd start with some famous words from people that we know.
Okay, so Michael Jordan, I don't know if you know, most of the world knows Michael Jordan. I'm very happy because he's from Chicago, and I'm from Chicago. And he made all the people in Chicago very, very happy. And what I didn't know about Michael Jordan, I only saw his wonderful shots, right? But I didn't know he had this mantra, which is the key to success is failure. And that's what we're talking about today in many different fields. And he says, I have missed more than 9,000 shots in my career. Imagine, Michael Jordan. I have lost almost 300 games. On 26 occasions, I have been entrusted to take the game-winning shot, and I missed. How awful. I have failed over and over and over again in my life, and that is why I succeed. And I think what he's trying to say is when we make a mistake, that's when we learn the most. Whatever you're working on.
Yeah, it's also interesting to point out that Michael Jordan was kicked out of his basketball team in high school because he didn't have any skill.
They thought he wasn't talented enough, so they said, no, you can't play.
So failure is a part of even the biggest successes.
And remember, when you fail, like Michael Jordan, try again. That's the same we have in English. If at first you don't succeed, try again. We all go through this.
Another quote that I really like is by Thomas Edison, the inventor of the light bulb. He said, "I haven't failed, I've just found 10,000 ways that don't work." So I thought that was a really interesting way of looking at it. Just 10,000 ways that got him to his final success.
Yes. And I know his poster you like him here because his poster is right around the corner. Thomas Edison. This is a children's author. She created the Harry Potter series. And she went through a lot of difficult times. As an author, I know that failure meant a stripping away of the inessential. So many times, whatever you're making, whether it's a vase or a book or a hospital product, it kind of has to go through the fire of creation. And you have to burn away the parts that are not necessary or the parts that are not good. And we all have to go through this. So she said, anything's possible if you've got enough nerve. She went from being a poor single mother to went through 12 rejections from book publishers saying, no, we don't want this book. And then the 13th one, the publisher's child said, Daddy, you have to publish this. And now she's huge.
And last, this is another quote that I really enjoy by Einstein, who said, "A person who never made a mistake never tried anything new." And I think that really sums up what innovation and design and problem solving, no matter what field you're in, if you're trying something new, you're going to make a mistake, and you have to just take that in your stride and make it a part of your process. So if it's so normal, and if mistakes are a part of success, then why are we all so afraid of it? And why is it so common that our school systems and every society around the world says, no, don't fail, don't make a mistake? And I think that's because of the size and the type of the mistakes that you can make. There's such thing as good mistakes and bad mistakes, good failures and bad failures. So we wanted to start giving examples of some of the mistakes that can be avoided and should be avoided, and then go into the process of how to make mistakes and fail in the right way.
So I lived in Argentina as a teenager. My father was an engineer, and our whole family went there. And Latin America, like many other countries, they say, "You Americans, you don't learn about our language, our culture, and and then we don't want your stuff." And this is a car that was very popular in the United States at that time, and then they tried to sell it in Latin America. And my friend said, "You're so stupid." Well, because they were teenagers. "Your country is so stupid. You call that car Nova. It means Nova means doesn't work." So nobody bought the car. And I've seen this happen many times in different countries, that our corporations don't talk to everybody they should talk to. They should have cultural and language consultants in different countries so they know this. So this is what happened with this story.
And so this story is actually very popular. When the Chevy Nova was first released, there were all these blog articles and memes about it, lots of press. It turned out that that car in particular actually did sell well, despite the name. But the story really does a good example of showing a common problem in large companies, especially ones that are mass manufacturing abroad. They don't take the time to research. and to see if what works in one place will work in another. And so we know that this story is actually a myth, but we thought it did a really good job of just illustrating that example, so we wanted to tell it anyways. But it's not just in big companies and industries that make these mistakes that cost millions of dollars to fix, but it's also in all domains.
So for example, in the field of architecture, there have been spectacular failures in architecture because the architects don't consult with the team, they don't consult with the people who know about the kind of building they want. And this is a theater that has produced 3 of my plays. And when they brought the model, it was beautiful. It was like, oh, so many different details, the lights, the colors, so modern, but they didn't look at it. Theater people didn't look at it. So when they made the theater, they made a big mistake. We found out they made a big mistake. Can you tell what it is?
So we're going to ask you to look at the ceiling, the floor, the chairs. Look around. If you were in this theater, can you find a mistake? It's hard to find, so if you're not a theater person.
It's a puzzle.
Does anyone want to try? Can anyone see it? It's hard to see. It's also because it's very small image.
Yes?
Would it be hard to see? It seems like all the seats are aligned.
Well, perfect. You honed in on the seats.
Yeah.
Yes. Every 2 rows are on the same riser, so that you can't see the stage. It should be like sloped very good. You should have been on the architecture team. So it should slope down gradually, like in a movie theater. So every second row, I talked to one of the architects, and he said, "Oh yeah, a lot of heads, a lot of heads." So, and once they made it, unfortunately, they didn't try to fail early. They just made their final prototype and spent a lot of money making this theater. Nobody can see in the second row. So they had to put a platform, they had to raise the stage. Because they had, the stage was on the level of the lowest row of seats. And they had flamenco dancers coming in, like this, from Spain. Nobody could see their feet. So they raised the platform, but now it's a new problem. For theater, the directors and actors have to climb up on the stage. They climbed down. It's a disaster. So usually they just have musical events. It's very sad. And we lost a beautiful theater space.
Yeah, and these are mistakes that cost money, but they're also mistakes that cost lives. There are bridges that have fallen down because of a lack of early testing. And so it's really important not to make these kind of mistakes. And these are the mistakes that we're so afraid of. This is why everyone is taught not to make mistakes and to be very precise. But we think that there is a way to make the right type of mistakes, and that is by failing fast and failing often. If you make 100 small mistakes that are discovered early in a design, then they're often less costly than one mistake made at a later stage, because you can change them and you can address them. And it's a very simple philosophy, but it's often hard to actually do it because of the fear of the mistakes that we have in society.
Yeah, we're all afraid of rejection. We all have that voice in our heads that says, you're no good, it's not good enough, you're not talented enough. The inner critic that might come from a parent or a teacher or a friend, and I've actually attended workshops to overcome that inner critic, because it's our worst enemy.
So now we're going to talk about the processes that we interact with, both in the literary world and then the design world. Processes that are the same in essentials and that allow you to find those mistakes early and often and be able to make those adjustments.
So for example, this is one of my first books as an author. And my company incorporated Design for America process. I didn't know it at the time, but it took 5 years to create this program. And they used each step, they worked with a big team of designers, illustrators, teachers, university professors, even students. And they tried out each stage on important focus groups. Focus groups are people who know about, do you understand focus groups? Yeah. And for this particular book, the focus groups included teachers, students, administrators, and experts in the field. Often you should listen to the people in the field and not the experts, because they have their own prejudices. You know?
And in typical design, a lot of people listen to the person paying for it. They get information from the person who's requested the design, but they don't necessarily talk to the people who are going to use it to the design.
So this company is great, and this is in the 1980s actually, and they're, you know, because it's a big project, they put a lot of early failure into it. And I was scared. I was like, oh my God, you know, I'm so scared they're going to criticize me. But they said, no, get it out, get it out. And they actually criticized me a lot to prepare me for being criticized. And then finally, after 3 years of different, better versions, sending out, getting them back, finally they published a limited first edition to try it out in the various schools. And then the teachers and students were like, they love to find mistakes. You know, you made a mistake on page 102. You made a mistake on page 620. You know, so it was very good because we got all this information back, and then only then we incorporated the useful comments to create the final second edition for sale. A process that took a whole 5 years. Now some financial companies have cut it down to 1 year. Disaster. The books are horrible because they don't take enough time to fail early. I can't emphasize it enough.
Absolutely. And so the process that's used here is actually very similar to the human-centered design process, if you're familiar with it. And this is a process now that I'm going to explain from the perspective of Design for America and the teams that are in that organization. So as I said at the beginning, Design for America is an organization that teaches design to undergraduate students around the country in the United States and graduate students. And it was founded by students at Northwestern University. 5 students wanted to find a way to apply what they were learning in class in the real world, no matter what domain they were in. So there was an engineer, there was a designer, there was an environmental historian, and they just wanted to use that information rather than waiting. And they wanted to also apply design because they believed in the power of human-centered design to solve very large and complex challenges. And they had gone to a lecture by Liz Gerber, who was a faculty member at Northwestern University. This is a woman who was trained at the Stanford Design School, which, if you know the Stanford Design School, is a very famous university, Stanford, in the United States, which has popularized human-centered design. And so she was trained there and went to Northwestern University and gave a lecture about her belief in a better future if students could use human-centered design. And so those students were inspired, and they created the organization at Northwestern. It now has over 500 students around the country in 21 different universities. So it's expanded really quickly, and it's because of the success of this process that embraces failure and early mistakes that other people have started to use it. And just to differentiate really quickly the difference between this design process and the traditional one, we're going to go into what the process is a little bit more. But there's a lot of immerses when you talk to users, not just do research on the computer. You actually talk to people, everyone who's interacting with the problem, and you test it early on again. So lots of trial and error, and we'll go through these exact steps. But another big difference with design is its interdisciplinary nature. So all domains working together.
So what we mean by human-centered design, which is kind of a big term, is that instead of like selling a product to make money for the marketplace, we try to address all these problems in the world, which are huge, and they're not getting any better. One thing I keep thinking is we send a man to the moon, and we can't solve these basic problems of human beings. So that's why human-centered design, that really attracted me about this program. And of course, students are very excited about it because they're very idealistic. And one way that I experience human-centered design in education, I talk to my students, I ask them, what do you need in your life? I work with them on health issues. That affects the environment. Employment is very important with my students. So, and that affects the economy, and also it reduces violence, because especially young people who are in despair are going to turn to drugs and violence to make, well, especially drugs to make money, that brings violence into the equation. And I'm going to give you an example of a non-for-profit service that my son, who's an economist tonight, created as a human-centered design. This is one of our typical ESL students in Chicago, and she always came into class very, very tired, and she fell asleep in class. And she wanted to learn English, but she was too tired. And we found out that a lot of our students had to work 2 jobs to live, just have food and a place to stay. She would go out to O'Hare Airport, 4 a.m. to clean O'Hare Airport. They'd come back to class, sit in class for 4 hours, trying to learn English. So my son and I consulted with other people in the field and with the students, and we said, okay, they want a living wage, enough money to survive on, enough money to go to school at night. So we built a not-for-profit that asks for $15 an hour minimum for any of the services. And then they have, we've been able to buy a computer for our students, our workers, and cell phones with the money from this. And they can go to school. So this is an image from a Vietnamese economist. I mean, that's what I'm saying. Work with people from many places, many different teams. He created this logo for us. And as you can see, it's a picture of a woman maid looking into the mirror. And it seems so great. I get emotional about these things because I think it's so important. It's so important.
And what I think this example illustrates really well is also how complex problems are today. Everything affects everything else. So if you're trying to make a change in health, you might have to make a change in education. And to make a change in education, you have to make a change in the economy. And because we think all these problems are so complex, that's why we think we need interdisciplinary teams to solve them. You need knowledge in all of these areas, and you need people to question the basic assumptions of those fields. So that's what Design for America does throughout the process. And that's a concept that people use regardless of if they're in Design for America. It's very common when people are trying to innovate to solve problems that are complex.
So first we have to understand. So we have to identify the problem. With our students, we said, what is the problem? Is our teaching boring? They keep falling asleep? And we talked to them. So we said, why are they having trouble learning English? And then we went to the community and we said, what is the real problem? No, our classes were not boring. They were exhausted. So we asked the actual people who we were trying to help. We just didn't try to say, okay, we have the solution. No, we had no solution, So we went and asked them. We talked to different experts. We talked to the director of the center about our plan. She said, don't make bread to sell bread, to make bread to sell bread. You're never going to go anywhere. She's very wise. So then we decided to reframe the question. It wasn't just how to keep our students in class. What can we specifically do to help them improve their lives so they can get more education and a better job? That's what they all want.
And reframe is, just making that question specific.
Yes.
It's hard to solve homelessness. It's much easier to solve foot care for homeless individuals in Chicago. Very specific.
Or how can we help our students stay in class? How can we help them find better jobs? It's all about how we can help people. This is a fun part. I love this part, ideas. As an artist and creator, I have ideas all the time, and I'm sure you do too. And at that point, when you're coming up with ideas to solve your problem, don't criticize yourself, okay? Don't listen to that voice in your head that says, no good, no good. Shut it up. Say, shut up, head. Stop, stop. Okay, just tell that voice to stop. And then you'll be amazed at how many good ideas you have. So at this point, you want to, like a volcano, spew out ideas. And it's better to do it with a team of people from different disciplines, because then you have someone to get a response from. You don't want to sit in the innovation lab here all alone and try to create something, or sit in your office in a university all alone and say, I'm the best, I can do this one. I did that, it doesn't work. So once you have a number of ideas, work with your team and say, okay, what's the best idea? Because there are many ideas, right? What can best apply to help our people? So once you pick a specific idea, then you build it. You make a model, a very simple model. In my case, my son Case and I created a business plan to help people. We went to a lawyer. You can create an image of a prototype of your product, and you'll see some in our presentation today. Whatever you create, keep working on it, and most importantly, go out and test it. This is really scary. The first time I went into a book publisher to test a prototype, there's only 2 pages. There was a big table of about 10 people, all much older than me, and they looked at me and they said, "How old is she? About 12?" Because I was very young. And I was like, "Oh, my bad headache." And then they spent like an hour criticizing my 2 pages. And I wanted to just sink into a hole and disappear. I was so upset. But the publisher said, "No, Judy, you have good ideas. Don't worry, I'll help you. And don't, at this phase of testing, you have to keep on." And Giselle's going to show you a specific example too. Don't give up. Never give up.
And don't take it personally.
Oh, yes.
That's another one. People often take criticism or negative feedback personally, but it's honestly just trying to get your idea to be better. And it's easy to say, it's a lot harder to do. It's practice, but it's something to be
Just
aware.
practice. You have to get tough.
So I wanted to give you now a specific example of this processing action. So I'm going to use a team from Design for America. And I'm going to use a team that was tackling a challenge of how can we reduce hospital-acquired infections. And all this means is infections that you get when you're in the hospital. How can you stop people from getting infections there? And that's showing the problem where, all around the world, people go in the hospital with a broken leg or arm and come out with a disease that they caught in the hospital. It's a very, very big problem around the world. And so these students, in this picture right here, decided to tackle that problem. So this is a group of students who were really affected by hospital-acquired infections. So this is actually my brother, so I know that story very well. He had a lung collapse, and so he's fine now. But he went into a hospital, and he realized that doctors were coming in and out of his room and not washing their hands. And he was a little worried. Very worried. This man right here, Mert, on the right, Mert Iseri, he had his father had a heart attack, also okay now. But when he went to the hospital, he came out with a very serious infection. And is now, again, fine. But they had this motivation. They realized how big of this problem was personally. It really motivated them to tackle it. And what they started doing was simply researching it online. This is a great first step that should never be skipped. And they found that it was a problem, and not just for them. So in the United States alone, 100,000 people die every year because of infections they get in the hospital, while in the hospital, that they didn't come in with, right? That's the key part. And this is the statistic that I really think is disturbing. Doctors only wash their hands 40% of the time they're supposed to. So what that means is that doctors greet people who have an infectious disease and then say, "Hi, how's it going?" And touch you and your hands, and they haven't washed their hands. And I want to be a doctor. I have a huge respect for the medical field, but that is a problem. That is a very big problem. And it's a problem that has existed for hundreds of years. And only recently they realized that you actually need to wash your hands, and that's the cause of illness. But it's still a problem that hasn't been solved for the last 100 years. But what's interesting is how a new perspective and this simple process of human-centered design can tackle it in such a new way to come up with a simple solution. So they went out and they did observations. And the first thing they realized was that though there were many sinks and soap dispensers in the hospital, there were no shelves. And so doctors were holding all these files and pieces of paper and had nowhere to put them down. And so the students said, aha, they're not washing their hands because they have nowhere to put down these folders. And if this was a typical design firm, they would have come to the owner of the hospital and said, "We have your solution. You simply need to build shelves. The problem will be solved." That's a typical design firm. And that would have been a big mistake and a bad mistake. It would have cost hundreds, maybe thousands of dollars to build all these shelves. And they would have had to remove them. And that's because when they went and talked to the nurses, they realized it was a bad idea. Hallways in hospitals are very small. The beds can barely fit through, right? If you put shelves there, The beds can't get through it all. And the only people who knew this were the nurses. The owners of the hospital didn't know because they don't go in the hallways with the big machines. But the nurses do it every day. And so when the students went to the nurses and said, oh, we have a great idea, we're going to build shelves, the nurses were like, no, terrible idea. Not only is it bad in that it won't help the problem, but it may cause the deaths they're trying to avoid. And so this was a big mistake that was avoided simply by saying at the very beginning, is this a good idea? Before they made it, before they put money into it. And even though this step is so easy, it's often skipped. Because you talk to the owners of the hospital, the owners saying, it looks like you did your research, it's a great idea. But you have to talk to the people who interact with your problem, the people who are in the hallways, not just the owners. And that's a very critical step of human-centered design. So this team was at first very disheartened. As you
they were very upset. They were like, oh, their heart went to their shoes.
It's that moment when your idea is told it's a bad idea. Not even kind of good, just terrible. And so they were very upset. But this is where you have to remember that failure is part of the process, and you have to learn from it. And so the students, rather than giving up, thought, well, what did this teach us? What else can we learn from it? And they knew now so much more about the functioning of the hospital, the hallways, the rush with the machines and the sinks and where they were and where they weren't. And so they took a break. They went to the beach. Breaks are important. Sometimes you just need to clear your head. That's not a mistake. That is a good decision.
Yeah, sometimes I do yoga. I get stuck. I do yoga. I go for a walk, and I always bring a little piece of paper and a pencil, and like I'll be running, and all of a sudden I'm like, aha! And I'll stop and write on a piece of paper, and I was like, who's that crazy lady?
So this is one of those moments. So the team is on the beach in the sand. It's 2 in the morning, I think, is the story with them on the beach. And they're thinking about this problem. They've been trying to get the doctors to go to the sinks. But after talking to the nurses and realizing how much of a rush all the doctors and nurses are, they thought, why don't we bring the sinks to the doctors? What if you flip the problem on its head? And so they started thinking about portable ways of washing your hands. How can you bring a sink next to the doctor wherever they go, right? You can't, put it on a cart and wheel it, it's too difficult. But how do you do that? And so they're on this beach, and the story goes that one of the students stood up with sand on his hands and wiped it on his pants. And the other student said, that's it, that's the motion. We all do that. If you're a child, an adult, any country around the world, if you have dirty hands and if no one's looking, what do? You wipe your hand on your hands. And so they decided to use that motion. And this is the key to observation. You can't find that out in a survey. You have to look, you have to watch, and you have to live it. And so they came up with the idea of taking a small portable hand sanitation device. So right now where you get hand sanitizer, there's these machines in hallways and hospitals, and you press it and it puts hand sanitation in your hands and you wash it.
Hand soap that you don't need to wash off.
Exactly. So they took that idea and just made it smaller and put it on the leg. The idea is if you had a small device this big and you put it on someone's pants or seam, they could wipe their hands on their pants and it would put hand sanitizer into their hands. They could wipe their hands and it would be clean. But again, not like traditional designers, they showed this as their idea first, which is incredibly ugly, right? No one wants this, but that's the idea. They just wanted to ask the nurses, is this a good idea? It's made out of foam, it's made out of tape, it's made out of cardboard. It's not the right size, it doesn't have hand sanitizer in it, but it was enough to show the nurses the idea. They put it to their legs and said, would you do this? And would you wipe it? And the nurses were like, oh, well, yeah, no, I like that idea. It would have to be small, it would have to be clean, and they were able to work with the students because people are much more willing to give honest and clear feedback if it looks like you made it very quickly. You only took 5 minutes, it's okay to criticize because you didn't put hours of work into it. If you give a finished product, people feel kind of bad. They feel bad for criticizing. So they'll say, oh, it's a nice idea. Yes, I'll use it. So they're more honest if you give an early prototype. And eventually, through testing, you can move on to a nicer prototype. And you can test the function. Does it work the way they want it? Is it the right size? So that's what they did. And eventually, SwipeSense became this. So this is SwipeSense today. It fits like it's kind of like the size of a computer mouse, and it fits on your pocket. And the team has become a startup. This is now their job, their full-time job. They like the idea so much that after college, this is where they went. And so they're now a company. They have 12 different staff members, and they're also in 12 hospitals now. SwipeSense is being tested in different hospitals around the country to prove that it's having an effect on hospital-acquired infections that you get in the hospital, and it's proving very effective so far. And so this is an idea that is doing incredibly successfully. It's doing very well. And the only reason they got here is because every step of the way they made mistakes, but the right kind of mistakes. They checked where those mistakes were early and often. SwipeSense actually has some 150 different versions of their device before it got here. And this company is only 3 years old, so you can do this very quickly if you set your mind to it. The first idea for SwipeSense, they came up with it in 3 months. This prototype right here was after just 3 months. So if you actively seek out mistakes and you know that process, you can do successfully in a shorter amount of time what takes a lot of people many years to develop. So how do you make those useful mistakes? What are the steps of this process that this team makes that all teams should do? Just the highlights of why they were successful is just talking to people and everyone, the nurses, the doctors, not just the owners or the customers. Talking to professionals and experts, making sure you're making the right decisions and not just listening to the crowd. Both are important, but normally design firms do one or the other, but you have to do both. Empathizing with needs, going to the beach and wiping your hand on the pants. You have to understand the behaviors to design for it. Mock-ups over products. Don't be afraid to show an early version of your idea to get real, honest feedback. People think it reflects poorly on them, but if you present it well and you explain why you've done it, in a rough mock-up, people are more likely to be honest with you. And finally, test early and test often. Don't wait till it's too late, it'll be much more expensive. So that's the example of one team in Design for America that used this process and did it very well. But it happens for teams around the country. All the teams that we've seen that use this process are very good at it. And even the first time they do it, they get better and better and better at accepting failure. These are just an example of a few teams, other teams at Design for America. A team up here is called Jerry the Bear. They created a teddy bear that has diabetes to help children who have diabetes better understand their illness. The idea is that children can take care of the teddy bear, and by taking care of the teddy bear, they'll be able to take care of themselves sooner. And it's also a company now, and it had the same process of making mistakes. But it also doesn't matter what domain. Design for America has projects on street safety. So for example, this team's doing an early prototype. You can see they're using chalk on the street to get bikers to stop at stop signs. So bike safety, this process is used. This is for autism, trying to teach other students about autism in the community. It's called Empathy Box. It's a box where families with autism can share their stories. Homelessness is a map over there. They created a map of resources for homeless individuals. So this problem has been used everywhere. So this is natural disaster, this is racism, this homeless foot care. Any problem you can imagine, if you're willing to make those mistakes early, you can find innovative solutions. So those are just examples in the design world. And to prove that idea of it doesn't matter what domain, I really wanted to pull in Judy's experience to share what she's done in the literary world to really show its reflection in the books.
Yes, I was so excited to visit these classes last year at Northwestern, and I said, well, if I had known this 30 years ago, I would have saved so much time and energy. Fortunately, I had some good book publishers. So when I was 27, they gave me a contract for this very first book for teaching English as a second language. And as it was a good company, they sent out early copies over and over again all over the world. Actually, this is a revision of a very successful program. And I got that first contract. I did okay on my book. So then the publishers said, oh yeah, I was working with all these expert authors, and I was telling you they were making fun of me, but I did fine. And so then I worked on a children's program. They gave me a contract for a children's program for ESL. This is a ideation, what do you call it? No, not a mock-up, a repetition, a revision, iteration of an earlier program. So they were constantly revising things themselves. And I got contracts from other publishers because they heard about me and said, oh, Judy's good, you know, so she has a lot of good ideas. So then I got a contract for adult literacy program. So it works with everybody, but you have to be willing to fail and listen to others. Then I went on to, so after I had some experience, I began to argue with book publishers. And I said, wait a minute, you know, you haven't tested this carefully enough. This is a book, wonderful children's book, the third or fourth iteration, revision of a children's program. They called it Parade. And it was a great book, games, songs, I wrote some songs for it. And it's selling well in Latin America, and I went to give some presentations like this one. And the teacher said, why didn't you put any stories in the book? Children learn by stories. And I said, well, I told the editors that, and they said, no, we have all this marketing information from computers and surveys. I said, you can't believe all that. You have to get information from real people. So I argued with them for 2 years. Every time I talked to them, I said, where are the stories? We don't need stories. Finally, one day, an editor called me up, and she said, Judy, you need stories. Our marketing people have come back from Latin America, and all the teachers want stories. And since you fought with us about it for 2 years, we're giving you the contract. So I was very happy, and I wrote 30 stories for these books, and 4 of them have been published in Chinese. If you put my name on Google, you will see the Chinese versions of these stories. In fact, one Sunday in Evanston, where I lived about 4 years ago, I got an email from a teacher in China, and she said, Professor, our students using these stories for 10 years, and there's something we don't understand about one of the stories. She said, the father doesn't want the son to eat. Why? In China, the father wants the son to eat. I was like, well, it was a German story. But you know, you have to adapt to other cultures.
And I think something interesting that this shows as well is the problem with mass surveys. So you get these big surveys of what is the market is interested in. And that's great, and that can inform a lot of really fabulous designs, but it also hides a lot of information if you only depend on those surveys. Because in surveys, you can't ask follow-up questions. You can't say, are you sure, or what do you mean by this or that? And you can't see cultural differences as clearly as Judy's talking about, like different areas in different countries don't necessarily come out depending on how the surveys were, the data was generated. So again, even in the literary world, observations, talking to people are really critical when you want to have relevant design.
And they had to make they had to print a whole new series of books, a revision, and they had to put a new title on it, New Parade. Before it was this parade, now this is New Parade. So, and all that experience from working on these different books finally gave me the courage, and I want to encourage you today, follow your dream idea. Don't just sit and wait and think, oh, it can't be, it can't be. This is something I'd always wanted to do. I knew there weren't any good books or plays. I wrote to Fulbright and made a proposal that gave me 2 Fulbright grants to go to Uruguay to research this poet. And as you can see, I created a book. I had to publish a new edition in Spanish because I made mistakes in Spanish, and they wanted the cover in red. I had made it in blue, so I had to publish a second edition. And then I've had 6 productions of the play in different countries, Uruguay, Argentina. And Saturday night, I was invited to submit the play for the Taiwan International Theater Festival. So that might be production number 7. You can come see it. I hope. But you know what? And this just comes out. You know, I just talk about it. Some people say, ah, not interested. What really made me mad, I took the idea to a very famous agent in New York in 1990, and William Morrow, and I told him, I said, Judy, stories about Latin America don't sell. And he was a real expert, you know, and, but you know what? I just didn't listen to him. I kept my dream alive, and its time came. And I want to encourage all of you today to do the same thing. Follow your dream. It can happen. Be patient.
And that's like that helps with the failure aspects. When you make those mistakes, and when people say it's a bad idea, sometimes it is a bad idea. So
Yes.
you might want to check with several
Yes.
people. But also, if it is a good idea and you just need to make it better, you need to improve it and take in that negative critique. If you love what you do, or if you like what, at least really like what you do and believe in it, if you believe that it's the right thing, it helps with getting through those mistakes and those failures. Otherwise, it's much easier to become discouraged.
One of my biggest critiques was from a 7-Eleven clerk in Uruguay. He was copying the translations of my poems. He was Xeroxing. He's like a young kid. And he said, "You made a mistake here." And I was like, what? Like 20 different university professors, writers, had looked at all my translations like very carefully, and I corrected. He said, "There's a big mistake on page 7. I was like, "You're a clerk, a Xerox clerk in 7-Eleven, you know." But he was right. He said, "You translated that word wrong, and it was mocha. I translated it as chocolate." He said, no, that's cream of coffee." So I had to go back to my hotel room, fix the mistake, go back to 7-Eleven, and make new copies.
You never know where you
That's the process. You never know when you're going to get your feedback, so be open. And don't say, just because you're a clerk. I'm going to go through this. I already talked about this. This is my poet. Team, go ahead on that one. I just talked about it. And once you have success, it keeps building. We have a saying in English, nothing succeeds like success. Give yourself the time. It took me 20 years with this project, and I never gave up. Once I did this play and the novel, then I've written 5 more plays. And as you can see, one of my newest plays, Happiness and Tears, was produced for the first time in Chicago on that date, and now it's going to be produced in Chicago, 16 performances on next fall. So don't give up. I'm telling you, don't give up. Developing an idea is a messy process, whatever you're making. Like Giselle showed you the early prototype of the swipe sense, right? It's going to be a mess, and you're going to, tear your hair out and crumple papers and say, "No, this is no good." But that's the way it goes. This is a friend of mine in a fiction writing group. We get together once a month, and we read each other's things and give each other feedback early. Go back, revise. Read it again to your group. Go back, revise. Then read it to a small public audience. Go back, rewrite. Then read it to a large audience. Go back, rewrite. And with theater, it's very easy because you have your whole audience sitting there, and opening that, you're like, "Oh my God," I was like, "Are they going to throw tomatoes at me if they don't like it?" And you can tell on their faces if they're interested or not. It's really scary, but you have to go through it. We all have to go through it no matter what we make. And finally, just get help wherever you can. You have to overcome your fear of failure and have the courage to create. It takes a lot of courage to believe in yourself and your idea. You're going to run across a lot of people who say, "That's dumb," right? This book helped me a lot, the courage to create. I went to workshops, I got my master's in creative writing. Do whatever you need to help you.
It's like that Churchill quote,
Yes.
"There's nothing to fear but fear itself."
Yeah.
Especially
We are our worst enemy. And imagine you could come up like Giselle's team with a wonderful product that can help humanity, and instead, because you don't believe in yourself, that product stays in that idea stays in your computer, all alone.
This leads us to another one of our favorite quotes. "Failure is unimportant. It takes courage to make a fool of yourself." So take it with humor. The best way to deal with the mistakes that you're going to encounter, it's a natural part of the process, is to, have fun with it. This is a natural part, and sometimes laughter is your best defense.
Yes.
But yes, the key to success is not to be afraid, to know that it's a lot of work, but to integrate seeking out mistakes early and often through interdisciplinary feedback, and knowing and really, really going out there. And finally, know when to celebrate. Know when you have succeeded to make sure you celebrate that moment. It seems kind of obvious, but it's actually often not done. Successes and failures are frequent. So if you have a lot of failures, make sure you celebrate those successes to give you the energy to go through some more failures.
Yes.
So those are some examples of what I would call unintentional mistakes. They made mistakes they didn't know they were mistakes, but they learned from them. You make these mistakes, you go out, get feedback, and try again. But there's also an incredible power in making mistakes on purpose when you know that they are mistakes. And we wanted to explain that concept a little bit more by talking about this painter.
So this is a famous French painter. You know how to say that?
Yeah, Edgar Degas.
She's from France. In the U.S. And you may remember his many paintings of ballerinas in all their perfection. He studied all the different aspects of painting to create a beautiful portrait of ballerinas on stage. And then he began to think, wouldn't it be more interesting to see the ballerinas off stage before they go on stage, see them as human beings? And so that beautiful ballerina you saw gliding across the floor and turning, actually backstage they're fixing their straps, they're fixing their hair. One of them is sleeping because she's so tired. Another one is rubbing her foot. And it's much more interesting than these endless pictures of perfect ballerinas.
And actually at the time for Degas, in traditional painting, the beauty was in perfection. But he was one of the first to challenge that and see the beauty in imperfection. He said that reality isn't perfect. Reality has mistakes. It has moments of hair and shoes, and that's what is beautiful, and you have to embrace it. And so it was his first paintings that were different in that way that really gained him popularity and interest. And he's now a very well-known artist for his time. And not all his works were, fantastic. Sometimes he made the mistakes go, I think, a little bit too far.
Yeah, this is, but it's fascinating. Yeah, after he painted all those paintings of imperfect human ballerinas, he painted jockeys before the race. Very harshly criticized for this one, because he went, even though he drew beautiful horses and painted all the muscle and everything, he put a pole right in the middle of the painting that went through the horse's head. And it went against all the rules. And so many people said, what are you thinking? This is horrible. Go back to painting ballerinas. But he intentionally did the wrong thing because he wanted to move beyond what the rules were. And often when you're a great artist, you say, I don't want to do the ordinary thing. I want to create a new genre, a new style. And
it takes a lot of skill to actually be able to do this. So you need to know the rules, and you need to be able to make it perfect to then be able to make an intentional mistake that actually has value to it, that is actually still beautiful. And so the ballerina paintings, for example, are some of the most well-known paintings in the world, and they simply show imperfection as the most beautiful thing to him. And so we want to go a little bit farther than that. We think that this same rule applies to many things, not just art, but all things that you get rules for over time, that get developed and perfected over years and years.
So for example, I used a computer that was popular even before this one. It's now in a museum. It was called an Osborne, and it was like a sewing machine, and it was the first computer that you could take home and use. And I had to learn all the DOS commands for each letter, everything. It was so much work, but it saved me so much time as a writer. I just, I didn't have to keep typing up new versions, running to the post office, knocking on the truck, saying,